I'm Clint Rosser. I'm the Chief Client Officer with Practice Match, working into my 11th year currently here, held multiple positions, but for the most part, I've spent a good part of my career working on the client side within the physician recruitment team. So, getting into the details, understanding models and seeing that, the traditional model and the way it's structured today is kind of run out of its runway. And this is through a lot of conversations that I've had with client base, through conferences, one-on-one calls, going on site with some of our client account managers for some of our current clients. So this is really built off of information and facts, that we put together. The other thing that I like to just let everyone know that this is not going to be a product pitch. From that standpoint, we don't believe in that. If we're going to do a product pitch, we're very upfront on, here, come learn about the Practice Match fairs or whatever it is. This is not. This is around operating philosophy, that we're seeing today. And we're hoping that it's going to allow you guys to walk away with knowledge, kind of review your current model, understand the differences in workforce and creating a workforce engine, and then building a business case from there. So if there's one thing I'll challenge you with is just leave this with one thing that you feel you can change either this week, on Monday, that can start to build out that 90-day starting point for you. Screen here. All right. So what we'll cover today is why traditional recruiting models is breaking down. And first, looking at that, I always want to kind of diffuse, like when we get into this, it's not that the model that's there is anything wrong. It's just what we're seeing currently today. We see a shift and a dynamic shift on some of the stats that we'll give you. So what we're going to do is we're going to show you the data because we think a lot of recruiting leaders feel that there's a gut feel, and sometimes that gut feel is valid. But when you're trying to get to the table within budget and talk about what you need to bring more to that C-suite, that leadership, that CFO that's out there. Second, we're going to look at the workforce engine and actually try to specify 4 specific operational shifts, that you guys can start to put in place and replace that one search at a time approach and give you real-time information on each than just having that going back to that gut. Third, we want to talk about, numbers. We want to build the case around what you're looking at, how it's getting treated, and move this into a strategic investment instead of a staffing footnote when you jump into those meetings and the breakdowns, whether it's based on your overall budget, going into a department and asking for what you need, but to give you that information. And then fourth, kind of some practical steps around building, the workforce engine moving forward and kind of why. So why this topic, why the traditional recruitment model is breaking down, what we're seeing, and I'll start off with basically, this isn't for, what we built this for is not for 5 years from now. It's not from 5 years ago. This is really looking at now. And it's not, a physician recruiting is not all suddenly easier or just harder. Everyone knows that if you've been in this role at any length of time, that recruitment is not easy, especially physician recruitment. And I'm not here as a vendor to try to tell you any different. I'm not here to say something that you don't already feel every single day based on what you're seeing from a workload perspective, the client pool that's out there. But what's changed is that the market has shifted structurally underneath the old playbook. And I'll get to that playbook next from that standpoint. But the applicant pool itself has gotten smaller relative to the demand that we're seeing out there. The effort required to source a single candidate has gone way up since I've come into this and definitely over the last couple of years. And none of that's reversing on its own. Usually you'll see trends that are moving along, and we're just not seeing that anymore. We're not seeing the trend line like you kind of do in physician recruitment. I will say briefly, this year has been weird depending on where you're at, where we didn't see a lull in recruitment efforts. But you're not seeing that overall flow of this moving back and forth, which kind of tells you we're kind of here to stay and it's not reversing on its own. So the next few slides that we're going to show are real numbers that you can use, get away from the feelings of why things have gotten tougher. And that's why we're going to, show them and give you some grounded information and data that kind of sets us apart and what you can walk away from. So 2 ways to run a recruiting team. And I want to diffuse defensiveness here a little bit and say, if you're on the left column, you're not alone. I consistently have speaking engagements at conferences across AAPPR's level of conferences to primary cares through each state, to other specialized conferences, and seeing the traditional or the transactional recruiting is where a lot of clients sit, a recruitment team sit, and then they'll sprinkle in a little bit of the workforce engine, but they're not completely looking at the workforce engine. So, don't take this as, wow, we're doing that and something's wrong. You're sitting where a lot of people sit today. And so when we break this down and you look at row one in the traditional waits for a vacancy, and what I mean there, and I'll get into this deeper on a couple slides down, is the workforce engine anticipates the vacancy. So this goes to where, unfortunately, a lot of organizations definitely do not have, and if you are doing this is fantastic, but it's anticipating the growth, it's anticipating change, it's anticipating hard to fill positions, instead of it being a surprise, hey, we need another cardiologist in St. Louis, we need this over here. It's anticipating the vacancy, which allows you to plan. Most searches are starting from zero every single time. And with a workforce engine, you're keeping candidates warm. And kind of what I'll say a couple times in that is that when you're keeping the candidates warm, these are the candidates that, not the ones that absolutely said, I do not want to practice in St. Louis. And I'll use that, I'm actually in the St. Louis area. And I don't want to be there. These are the ones that maybe are not right now. These are the ones that didn't tell you no. These are the ones that might have started going through the pipeline and you filled the role before they got through it, and they still can be viable. So keeping candidates warm, whether it's through conferences you attend, career fairs you attend, whatever it is, keeping a warm candidate pool. Win or losses, one search at a time. This is one where it's isolation. It's very compounding as far as the gains, and the search, if you compound the gains on every search, it's going to make it easier moving across. And then retention. Retention typically, I know a lot of recruitment teams are involved in at least part of the retention, but the reality is, and I'll show you how they connect further in the presentation, but retention starts at first contact. This is no different than any role that is customer, client, prospect facing, is that you're that first avenue. But the reality is you're gaining information that will help your organization as we move through this. So it's retention definitely starts at first contact. Now, why is this important? And I'm going to kind of concentrate on this slide a little bit and tell you why. So what we're seeing across the board is that this number used to be much higher. And what this represents is that 0.4 applicants for every physician job that's out there. And 0.2, and that's for the physician, 0.2 applicants for every advanced practitioner position that's open. So once again, for every rec, you have less than one qualified applicant in the market on average. Now this will fluctuate depending on your region, your specialty, your area, but in general, when you combine all the data, you're looking at about this ratio, which means that you're already fighting uphill on a small pool. That's happening. This is not one candidate that you particularly maybe even want. It's maybe someone who hasn't finished training yet. It's so included in this 0.4 is that it's people testing the market. So the numbers sometimes can fluctuate a little bit smaller than what that reads. And what we noticed is we went and tried to we did pull information from pandemic. And if you've been in this industry through COVID, you kind of know these numbers and what they saw, and then you saw the kick up. We're not seeing that here. This is not a cyclical stat. We're seeing this normalize, which means that's the course in which we need to correct and change our models, because this is the norm now. From a structural perspective, this number is staying consistent because you all know the pool. Unfortunately, you're seeing the individuals in the shortage that's coming because, when you look at medical school, you look at the residency enrollment caps. These have been either the same or barely moving for decades, and it will change with policy, but it's not going to change tomorrow, and it's not going to be impactful for what we're trying to accomplish the next 3 to 5 years. That we're out there. In top of that, you're also looking at the aging workforce, that's heading towards retirement. And that has slowed down a little bit post-COVID, but you did see retirement move a little bit faster from a replacement perspective. Geographic maldistribution means that applicants who exist aren't evenly spread across the markets. So that has separated itself, and we have some really nice graphs on the previous webinar, and possibly we can get it from the client account managers or a salesperson to show you, but we have a graph that kind of shows specialties, region, and how they separate a little bit from there. But it's not, it doesn't change a whole lot from that standpoint. And then the ratio has been trending one direction for years. And what I mean by that is looking at the cycles, it's staying in one direction, which unfortunately is going that 0.4. Used to be 0.6, and it just keeps moving in that direction. It's not fluctuating up and down like at least as of the last 4 or 5 years, it's not fluctuating in an upward movement. It's actually coming down. So this kind of tells us this is a structural shift, and it's not a temporary market condition, and we have to act upon that. So practical implication for recruitment teams that if you're waiting until a requisition is opened, and this is where we're going to get from being a proactive, and start sourcing, you're already behind. If this is the pool, you've got to start working closer to knowing when an opportunity opens, and start that clock earlier. Because if you're starting in a time that you get approval, you're behind, from that standpoint. When you build upon a little bit of what else is happening in the market, you look at connections and what it takes. So I've been doing this. I'm working into my 11th year. I will tell you, 9 years ago, this was 5 to 7. I think in 21, it was right about 9.6. And now we're looking at 13.6 touches were in 23, and that jumped to 16.6 in 25. We've looked at the number in 26, and it is going up as well. And what that means is it means that the recruiter, the sourcer, on your actual day, the same number of hires are requiring you to move almost 0.25% more in activity. That doesn't mean I need to send 1/4 more emails. It means overall my connection and my touch points and everything else that I'm doing to get a candidate interested in my role is requiring more touch points, more work on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly fashion. And that's before you even look at the harder conversions on some of the other specialties. This is just an overall pool that we're looking at, from that standpoint. And then there's a little bit of detail that when you look at this, roughly half of those candidates that are actually converted into something outside of what you're trying, or outside of business hours. If you've sourced for any length of time, you can see that the uptick, and we have a sourcing team to kind of give you some additional data. We have a sourcing team here that works all crazy hours, and that's because they're getting the results outside of those normal business hours. No different than we're seeing in some other areas, but unfortunately, that means that you need to be looking at your tools and what you're actually using to be a on all the time channel from a sourcing perspective, because that's when the outreach is happening. So it's just those two numbers on top of the 50%, almost 50% candidates that are connecting outside of that time frame. So you can see that not only from the previous slide, smaller pool, less candidates per open job that's posted. Then we jump in and we're looking at recruiting got harder. Not that it wasn't already hard, but it's gotten harder based on the activity that you need from an output perspective, from there. Now, where pressure is the highest, and I'm trying to set up as we work through this, and there, once again, I hate to keep referencing a previous webinar, but it's out there and we can get you information on it. We have a bigger graph. We can pull this information to look at all specialties, look at most of the markets, but we know based on where they're at, hardest to easiest, and not that anyone is the easiest. You know, hospitalist would be the one I would tell you right now that seems like it's I don't want to say easy, but there's an abundance of hospitalists, and I think if you've recruited for any length of time, you'll know why, based on schedule and all that. But from highlights of just 4 areas where the pressure is the highest, emergency medicine and anesthesiology runs chronically short in almost every market that we look at. So when we're looking at that, we put it in a category, and it's traditionally never even getting to a light green as far as for most markets. Primary care shortage are compounding, as access demand outpace, the new graduate pool that we're seeing out there. So you're seeing it more patients wanting appointments, not more doctors to see them, and that's affecting the primary care. Rural and FQs, community health, they are actually, now on top of the shrinking pool, they're competing with that larger organizations, the larger physician groups, the larger hospital networks, and there's really no separation. They don't have a separate pool. It's the same pool that they're dealing with. So the rural are really having to work on what their process, how they approach it, from that standpoint. And in behavioral health and psychiatry, they are some of the longest fill times in the industry. So start to finish, the fill is considerably larger for those 4. But once again, just to kind of give you an overview of some of the highest pressure areas, we have more data on this that we can share. And definitely I'll give you my contact information, reach out, and we can work on getting what you're looking for from that. To make sure you understand what this looks like is for openings and future openings, you can continue to push the need for a workforce model, because that old model, based on what we're seeing here, just isn't going to continue to give you the output that you're looking for. So when we jump into what workforce engines look like, what I want to do is walk through and why, because once again, talking about what we discussed, shrinking applicant pool, the rising effort per submittal, the specialties which are especially hard to fill, long time to fill, is what's going to make it basically going to allow you to separate yourself as you put in a workforce model. Those things are impacting you day to day. So that question that this screen is going to answer is, I want to get concrete about 4 operational shifts that make up what I'm calling a workforce engine. Now, when I get in there, this is basically what we've looked at, worked with clients, heard them, and developed from that aspect. You might change this a little bit. This might change a little bit from how you view it, but it is fundamentally changing how our approach is. I kind of highlighted a little bit on the slides. The other thing I want to say up front is this isn't asking you to purchase new software. This isn't a big budget ask. This isn't an executive approval. This is something that we hope you're going to walk away from a standpoint, or I know you'll walk away if you apply one thing, that you're going to be able to begin immediately with not having to invest. There's things in a recruitment team that you can start as we go through this as your own initiative, which is exactly why we want to walk through this, as we get moving. So 4 pillars, fairly simple, for what we're looking at is 4 pillars of a workforce engine. First one is forecasting. Forecasting, in my opinion, I'll relate this back to several conversations that I've had in the past couple of weeks, even, and this has happened all through the first 7 months, 8 months of this year, is something that either you're doing or you're not doing. And I'll give you a prime example. I work with one health organization that when we talk strategically with them on what their recruitment strategy looks like, they have a very clear as possible, and knowing that the industry can flux or their market can flux or their leadership could change direction. They have a 1-3-5 plan. In that 1-3-5 plan, they are looking at detail in regards to growth into what specialties and areas or locations they feel they're going to lose a doctor, either from their own leaving, or maybe they just don't want them in their health organization anymore, but they've developed that. Then I've worked with health organizations in a talk that just happened yesterday, so it's very fresh, where they don't have even a 1 year plan. But we were going through their conversation on their open jobs and knowing strategically what we were trying to accomplish with them. They had two specialties listed out there that they don't have openings for. And I started to ask why they're doing that. And they're essentially doing their own forecasting. They know traditionally that they have hard retention within, one's a cardiology and one's a urology position. They have hard retention in specific locations that consistently every single year they're asked to recruit for. So they're essentially doing their own forecasting. They know that vacancy is out there. So what they do is they keep those positions open. If they get a viable candidate that comes to the pool, they go to leadership, knowing with proof of here's what we've dealt with, here's the history of this position, and then they work to get that candidate through. That isn't the optimal, but they are doing part of it. They're using their own information, knowing consistently year in and year out, what are we recruiting for and why? Then you jump in that continuous pipeline, and this is the never start sourcing at zero. This is going to, in my opinion, when you work through this is where you're going to start to look at how do I keep any kind of warm motion in play for candidates that weren't that hard no, that I found through certain avenues, weren't ready to make a relocation, but was very upfront about it, but said, I really love your organization. Maybe this could be something down the line. If you're doing your notes and you're adding to whatever you're using, doesn't matter to me. To track this is where you can start to build out folders to keep your marketing going. We do this internally, once again, with our sourcing team. We keep candidates warm that have basically either said no, weren't selected, but they're looking for opportunity, from them. So it's keeping that part moving forward and not starting at zero. And I'll show you why that's going to be impacted. This is real data that we pulled from some clients. Business alignment, recruiting activity to your organization impact. This will be different to who you are. And what I mean by that is, if you're community-based, it's all about the community, it's about serving the community. That might be your number one when you go into that C-suite, CFO, that meeting that you need to get aligned with what our business is around. That could be about the serving. And then with other organizations, it's going to be about revenue. And so how are you aligning your business alignment in a category and a priority that reads to your audience, and this is your internal audience to understand what your team is doing and speaking your story. So it's going to be important that when you're connecting with the leaders and as you improve, that's what it aligns with that agenda. And then the retention feedback, basically what you're learning with every single hire or every single person who went through your hire process and even declined, is that the next search can be better if you're applying what you're learning. Your retention down the line is going to improve based on what you're learning and sharing with your health organizations. And we'll get into what that looks like over the next couple slides. So forecasting, people who plan for who's leaving before they're gone. And that's the core idea is a model attrition and growth by specialty instead of reacting to whoever happens to be on hand, to hand in their resignation and move forward, or you guys choose and you didn't know, or growth. That means sitting down at minimum yearly. We have health organizations that are they are doing this quarterly. So when you start to understand, your growth by specialty instead of reacting, that's going to help you plan and no matter your tools, your activity, your output, and strategize on what you need to move forward. It's going to flag your chronic shortage specialties that are out there. For most of the health organizations, going back to the previous slide, that might be emergency medicine and anesthesiology. But sometimes that could be your primary care, cardiology, or urology. It's going to depend on your market. It's going to depend on what you're looking at for your data at that time. You need to flag them before that search ever opens. And going back to my example, if you don't have that overall plan, what can you build within your own team to say, every single year. We're always hiring for cardiology in this St. Louis hospital every single year, even though we're fully staffed. So coming up with that is definitely going to help you as you flag those, keep those opportunities open, keep those candidates warm, and move that rec along before it's actually even live, instead of starting in as a cold start from that standpoint. And be honest with your stakeholders. One of the things that you'll get in meetings and you'll see stats, or I'll be involved in a higher conversation, and I don't contradict the recruitment teams if I'm pulled into that higher meeting, is that be realistic about your days to fill benchmark. And I always will preference, use what's out there as your guideline, but build your own benchmark. I've been working on a consulting project with one health organization, and we're looking at the data, and there's two examples, and then also our advisory board. And we're looking at data that's been provided, whether it's AAPPR, MGMA, or whoever, on your days to fill. The problem with any of those are they're not defined the same. Even with our own advisory board, as we talk to them, they all define days to fill a little bit differently on when it starts, and sometimes when it ends. So my point is, use whatever data you have out there or you can get your hands on as your start, but build your own. Build your own days to fill the benchmark against your team, so you're using actual data, and then compare it against the market. But don't use the market, in my opinion, don't use the market as your end all be all and say either we're not performing or we are performing based off of what. Just use it as a great guideline, to start. So building your pipeline, that never stops. This kind of goes where you want to start. You never want to start at zero. And I say that, and I know that you're going to have to start at zero at some point. It could be a search that's been closed for a couple of years. It's been stable. So you're going to have to start at zero. But hypothetically, let's just talk about, for the most part, not starting at zero. You've done a lot of work as recruiters and sourcers with your health organizations, with every tool that you might be using out there. You've got candidates that have been genuine, live. You've gained through fairs, physician conferences that you attend, through your own recruiting efforts. Make sure you're using that as a great starting point. Make sure that you're continuously looking at to help with gap, on your searches. Not just switching it on at the moment that a rec sits there. Make sure you're using that as your stopgap. Remember that the earlier you can start, you're going to be able to move the candidate faster through there, from that standpoint, because we roughly have half the candidate connections, when you look at it, have already reached out to you in this warm pool. So using that as your starting point is going to improve your results for leadership as we move through this. And track qualified candidates per touch point, not just raw resume counts. Make sure that you're actually looking at your channels. What are producing candidates? What is the conversion of those candidates? Because you'll get flows that are happening and you're getting large number of applies, but what is your actual candidate flow in that pipeline? So is it applied to all the way through where do you start to create that as a valid apply that happened that you feel is got value? Because we even see it. We get a high, right now, hospitalists are just off the chart with applying everywhere. And so, but where's the value? Where's the value for that specialty? Where's the value in how many of those move forward, whether it's that specialty or others? So make sure you're looking at that on some kind of dashboard from a conversion. And I added one thing that doesn't kind of show on the dashboard at all. And this only works if you treat your candidates as long-term relationships rather than transactional. I look at this as no different than how we treat our clients. And you want to be treated. I see some names that have joined that I've had long-term relationships with. We value that. Do the same with the candidates. And I know there's some really strong recruiters, not only on this call, but that I talk to that do that. They've bonded and built a relationship with them. And that's going to be no different than what that physician does for their patients, what we do for you as clients, and now you do for them as a physician that you're trying to recruit. that'll stand out for them as they move through. Whether they picked you or not the first time, they will remember who was working with them. That will pay off for your organization as you will see a stronger um, pipeline, late stage pipeline, stronger acceptance rates, and you're gonna feel that as you move through this process. So just make sure you're treating that a little bit different. Making the business case. So the numbers that really the C-suite actually looks at, and this will fluctuate, like I told you before, because this is going to fluctuate based on who you're speaking to in the C-suite and what's the mission, what's the goal, that's out there. But the good practice is getting in a habit and sustaining, presenting your business case to have a budget conversation and making sure it's consistent. So as we go through this, you want to be able to build out what you're looking to present and keep that consistent. So it's just not a footnote. You want to make sure that you're having the information that lands with your audience that's out there. So when we look at this slide overall, this isn't just any spreadsheet that you're going to put together. It probably is going to be the single best reason workforce engines, stall out after a promising start, and that's because the consistency. The people closest to the problem, and you all know this, is you, the recruiter, you, the recruiting leader. It's going to be the sourcer. It's going to be that team, because the challenges well before anyone else does. You hopefully are lucky enough that the executives are listening. But the reality is they're dealing with talent acquisition and they have position. If you are physician recruiters recruiting the talent acquisition, you already know the challenges and how well you have to keep your information contained and your message clear of what's happening. But the executives who actually approve the budget that for that change, often they aren't immersed in the detail of physician recruiting and the dynamics today and the length of time to fill. They just don't know your job. So that creates the real disconnect when you look at what is happening from physician recruitment all the way to the C-suite. That's where you have to help work to have people understand the long-term cost that it takes to keeping this transactional instead of looking at this as an investment. And on top of that, a workforce engine has to compete with funding, of all these other lines in the budget. And it rarely has a single decision maker. You rarely see that it's one person you're going to step in front of, or it's going to be presented in HR. It's going to be presented in finance. It's going to be presented to a clinical leader. Obviously the C-suite that all have stake in it. So it's going to be important that you build out what's needed to clearly convey what you're dealing with. The report is consistent, and that's going to allow you to move this along. The tension is typically common enough that across this industry that I've actually been at a couple of the conferences, but in particular PMRC this past year, we had one of our highest rated, talks were around, it was a talk called, I'm trying to remember what it was. I think it was who's the head chef. And in that, they wanted to talk about the physician recruitment team and dealing with multiple stakeholders. So that's a talk that was resonating very highly with the attendance in the room, the surveys afterwards. So we know that it's happening and you guys are speaking about it. So it's keeping this in the forefront with everyone, because it's definitely a topic that's coming up. And you've got to work on naming the disconnect explicitly. Before you walk into a budget conversation, it often is already determined what they are looking for, unless you bind them with your data, with your consistency on reporting that actually speaks to the problem of the health organization. It speaks to the C-suite that you're working. So I think it's important as you kind of shift that you have to be thinking around. Now, recruiters and CFOs should be reading the same numbers, and honestly, that's a core problem. Once again, what we see is that they don't have the data or presenting the data that is typically consistent. It might go in with one, here's a problem, here you go, and here's some stats. But then the stats are different from meeting to meeting. So the core idea on this slide is that recruiters in the C-suite should be reading the same numbers, not different set of numbers that happen to describe the same problem. It needs to be consistent on what that looked like. So tie it to days to fill, to lost clinical revenue, not recruiter workload. Being at multiple levels within practice match, recruiter workload in some cases, if you have a great C-suite or a great leader, they're going to listen to you and they know that. But at some point, someone in that line, right or wrong, is going to say that's an excuse. It's a valid excuse when all of us in this call know that recruiter workload typically outweighs what you can do, but they view that as just an excuse. So when you tie it to something viable like days to fill, to lost clinical revenue, that starts to speak their language. Frame it as the applicant ratio, as the market risk, not as just as a footnote. Literally build it out that way to say, this is what we're dealing with. Our market says we need this from applicant to ratio to pool to however you want to build it. So then it speaks to what they're looking at and shows the risk of not filling this role either at all or in the time frame in which they're wanting. And then bring one reoccurring report instead of a string of one-off reps. Work with whoever, if that's us, if that's another vendor, if that's some partner. I mean, hopefully you consider us partners, but work with getting one report that looks consistent, that's the cadence that you're going to go in with instead of stringing one-off recs and updates and reading. This is what's going to consistently build the credibility with the C-suite over time. And that one report, you might be able to create one great report that gets a nod, but that recurring report keeps you at the table and it keeps you at that budget where it's not questioned. Once again, coming off calls in the last couple of weeks, I've worked on one consulting project with an organization out of Ohio, and that report is helping them, with keeping at the table, showing their story, showing where they're at, and that's one consistent report that they show consistently. So make sure you're doing it. When you're looking at the ROI, and this is an example, so please, these numbers are pulled from multiple sites. MGMA, there's a couple of very large agencies that do a really good job, in my opinion, on giving the industry some information on daily loss. AAPPR is some data. Like I said, MGMA, AANA, there's a couple others out there. But make sure that what you're building is concrete. This is the example. Once again, I'm going off of the lost revenue, perspective at this point. So make sure what you're looking at is concrete information. Be clear on how you're illustrating. Plug in what the cost of the vacancy. So looking here, one physician seat open 90 days. That's out there. Now, if we're looking at the warm pool, that's under the cost of the vacant seat and underneath the old way we do things. If we have a warm pool, can you move that 30 days earlier? So now you're starting to look at what's the impact. Now, both you want to be able to report no matter what. But when you look at the cost of the workforce engine, this is where you can start to build out a little bit of this is making impact. So you look at a loss of a typical role rolled into one, so it's going to be higher for certain specialties, $3,500 per day in lost clinical revenue. If I eliminate that 30 days earlier, are we saving 105,000? Once again, the number's going to. We have to have locums coverage also to bridge if we have a community and we need it. So what's the locum spend for the gap? And then the next search starts, from zero again, or I have a built pipeline. So when you look at this is the kind of math that turns a request for recruiting investment into a revenue conversation. And very rarely, if you look at it from a revenue perspective, are you denied? And this doesn't matter what you're looking for as far as to get across the hump. You can speak to their language in this fashion underneath this scenario. You're going to have a much better result overall. Not saying it's going to be perfect. You still might get some struggles there, but you're starting to present this in facts that allow you to sit at the table with real information that show. This starts getting into filling the role isn't the finish line, and this goes back to a little bit on the retention that we'll continue to touch on a little bit. And when you look at this, the essentially when they say they're good, it is not over. And I don't have to speak to all of you. Once again, I can kind of see who's on here without scrolling a lot of names, fluctuating. You guys know that there's the back out. There's people that say they're interested. They don't actually come in. There's the ones that all move in the pipeline. But the way of filling the role actually to the finish line, even though it gets treated as when the offer goes out, and don't start popping that champagne at that point, because, and I mean figuratively, unless you're on your own time, and then you can do what you want. But you're looking at that from that perspective. It's not 71% of physician offers get accepted, and then 80% of advanced practitioners get accepted. So, which means roughly 3 in 10 physicians move out and go back into decline after all the work, after all the candidates at the table, all the sourcing efforts have happened, all the touch points that we talked about earlier. It's all gone, because they back out. So, what that costs the organization, and where I'm going is that, when you're in that final stage, the top reasons that we're seeing out there is unrealistic workload, inadequate compensation, lack of work-life balance. Do you notice anything from those that are out there? And I know you're muted and that, but we're kind of rhetorical, but these are the same things that we get from physician focus groups that tell us why they leave an opportunity. Inadequate compensation, a lot of times is 3, but it's the work-life balance. You control that some, you don't. I mean, I get that. Unrealistic workload, kind of the same thing. They roll into work-life balance, but these results here that are given, that we pulled from why I don't accept the job to people leaving, are the same. And that's the crazy part. So this is where you can start to take the takeaway of what I'm finding through the recruitment process, apply that early, and start changing your topic. Quit talking about compensation right off the bat, unless the physician is asking for that, and start talking about things that is hitting them. Because you have a playbook. You go, okay, I got you on the phone. Compensation is X, and you start going through it. Well, the reality is start treating it a little bit different. Start treating it to what you're hearing. Start treating it to information you might have on why candidates are leaving. Address it up front. And then attack this from that standpoint. If you know that this is some of the reasons they're leaving, attack this up front. Attack this in your recruitment process so that you're not repeating it downstream every single time. Because that problem will continue to exist. It just doesn't change overnight. Make sure you're making the changes, giving it to the people from a retention perspective, and putting it up front in your recruitment process. And you'll see better results overall. Make retention part of your search. Kind of like I said, I kind of jumped ahead and do that. So once again, lead with the schedule, lead with culture, lead with that as the first conversation, not salary. If the candidate goes to salary, you got to point to where they're going. Totally understand that. We do that with all of you. If you're calling from you're already a client, you're calling us about certain things, you're leading the conversation. We want to talk strategy. You go, nope, I'm just concerned about this problem here. Perfect. Let's address it. If the candidate drives you to that, you got to go that direction. But if you're driving it, change it up a little bit. Start to move it into what this looks like from a workload perspective, and what this looks like from our culture. Be honest with that information up front. Don't get them down the pipeline. You lose them late, it costs you more. Get them out as fast as possible if that is potential and you have no way to address it from that standpoint. Feed the decline and the turnover reasons back into how you source, like I said earlier, because that's going to help. From a standpoint of how recruiting metrics connect to business, and I will say, think of this table as a transition guideline that you can literally bring into your budget conversation. And I'd actually suggest that and Lynn can confirm or put in the chat, but I think you guys get access to the slides or they're available. But I would make this your one pager, make this your own. If there's one thing out of here that you can translate this into the way you work forward with your leadership. Looking at recruitment metrics, day to fill, to start. That actually means lost clinical revenue, locum spend while the seat is empty. It could mean, if it's long enough, this agency spend goes up. That's out there. Business impact, cost of vacancy. Business impact, it could be your community. You're not servicing your community that's out there. So be thinking of other things that are impactful that you can add to this. You can change this however you want. Applicant ratio to specialty. What this actually means is where competitive pressures and hiring risk are the highest. So this is market risk exposure for you. Offer decline rate, weak spots in compensation, workload, culture fits. This culture fit. This is the retention risk indicator, not only through the recruitment process, but for your business. And then connections needed per submittal. This is how much harder, how much costlier the sourcing has become. And that tells the story. That's going to tell the story to leadership of, we have to do X to get Y. And that's where you then use that to say, this is what we need to effectively move the needle on what you're asking me to do for this role you just dropped in my lap. If unfortunately it is that urgent one that pops up that they say I need in 30 days, and you all know that's impossible. So take this slide, and honestly, get in touch with me. Let's go back through it. There's other things that are not on here. Could be more meaningful. You might have questions about it. I'm more than happy to work with any of you guys from that standpoint. Change the language, from that standpoint, but start to use this as one of your outcomes. So let's jump into the last part, which is you gaining a little momentum on how do you cover building your workforce engine, and where this starts on. I said Monday, it's a Wednesday. You might get kind of going and say, I'm going to do this tomorrow. All up to you guys. The numbers, the ROI math, and honestly, the organizational friction is what gets in the way. And so figuring out where you start putting this into practice without waiting for that perfect budget cycle or that perfect mandate or that perfect time. So we're kind of getting this last stretch in some practical side of this. So first couple steps, forecast first. Once again, if you guys have the ability to know what your 1, 3, and 5, one, I'll take 3, it doesn't matter. But if you know what that is, that's great. I put on here, build a 12 to 24 month expectation and growth by specialty. If you know what that is, that's fantastic. Now look at what's been given from a growth perspective, and it might have retention numbers in there we expect to lose, but then compare it to what you have. All of you, if you've been recruiting, you have tools out there, multiple tools that you could probably pull data and say, holy cow, we have been recruiting for this same role in this same location year after year, and I can see that we filled it 4 out of the last 6 years, but yet we're doing it again, and it's not from growth. Start planning for that. Add it to this model if they give it to you. Start building your own. If you don't know the expected growth, start doing your expected, your own expected from a needs side. Working with an organization, once again, in Ohio, they're doing this. They do not have a 1 or 3 year plan, but they know what they've been recruiting for the last 3 years. So we're grabbing that as the data, we're building that out and helping them build that. So they know that I'm going to leave this position and this position open because we're consistently always hiring for this. Second one, never go dark. Start working anywhere you can to look at how I warm or keep pools warm, especially as we're especially in shortages in general, but in some of those chronic shortage specialties. And you know what those are. You can see the residency and fellowship numbers. You know where those are lacking and the pool that you're going after. And then you kind of see some of the stats and what are the specialties that are declining quicker because of lack of people going in that specialty and or faster retirement. Don't let those go dark. Start to build some kind of continuous plan. If you're a client of ours, work with your account manager, build out some folders, say, how can I create something that keeps this pool warm? If you're looking at your overall strategy and you're going to physician conferences and you're attending career fairs or you're getting things in other areas, How do you keep that pool warm? They clearly were looking for a job. If they're not moving with you, but you had a great conversation, how do you keep that pool warm from that standpoint? So I don't want to over dwell on that, but it definitely, when you look at it and say, can I cut X amount of days? I know the example was 30, but what if you cut 15? It doesn't matter, but if you're cutting time, you're improving and helping the business. Connect days to fill and decline to revenue, coverage, messaging, community in that. I didn't have it. I probably should have. That's my oversight. But if you're community driven first, and I have talked to plenty of organizations, it's about the C-suite goes, why am I getting yelled at from a small community because we don't have coverage? That hits the recruiting team. So if that's one of them, connect those. Make sure you're showing that as a business impact. And if that's just another category that is included in revenue and coverage, so be it, and the community. Do that's out there. And then close the loop. When I mean that, route turnover and decline data back into how you source, and the messages candidates, are saying, and move that going forward, for future candidates. Give that to whoever is dealing with retention. And if it's you guys can use this as well, because I do know I work with a couple clients that actually own retention as far as in their department. They have a couple of people that deal with it. So move it into that group so it's a better understanding of how you use it. Not just into the exit interview that a form gets filled out and filed away and no one looks at. Actually look at this information on both ends and start to use it to make sourcing stronger. That allows you to build that out from that standpoint. When you look at the first 90 days, what I see is you got to break it down. You can't say I'm doing everything at once. So when you look at everything we've talked about, day 1 through 30, build the forecast. Map out an attrition risk for the next 12 to 24 months. I'm not saying the growth. Map that out. Make sure you're looking at this correctly. You know which jobs have been posted forever. You know which ones are below the threshold. If you don't have numbers like my views to applies, ask your partners and vendors for that. Because if your views are high and your applies are low, and I know I'm jumping into a whole different topic, but that helps with your forecasting, when you start looking at their data. Something's going on there. But map this out because you're going to have to do something. Turn on in days 31 through 60, because you're going to need some time to build it. Turn on your always sourcing in your top shortage specialties. Turn this on from a standpoint of warm pool. How do you keep them? How do you not make them upset? It's not all just, I want to text them again. I'm going to email them 38 times. It's not about that. How do you keep them warm? How do you keep them informed of what's going on with you? You got a great marketing team, talk to them, strategize around how you keep the message to these individuals. Keep it relative. If it's information and data, man, the physicians just love that. They will look at that and they keep resonating your name with that. That's keeping the candidate pool warm. Day 61 through 90, tie your days to fill and offer decline data to one recurring report. Remember, you're trying to get to one report that you're going to be going into these sitting at the table meetings with C-suite, CFOs, leaders of those departments. But start to get that tied into one overall report. If you need help, let us know. Show us what you have. Work with us, and we can definitely, start guiding you in that area. Or I can point you in directions of some peers that are definitely excellent at doing this. 90 plus route retention data back into sourcing and messaging. You've always got the always on sourcing. Now you've got your data and information. You start moving that up in the process, and that's going to help the whole thing flow a lot better. But remember, none of these 4 phases, once again, require you to go back and ask for headcount. They don't require you to go ask for new technology purchase. Definitely at the beginning, you might find something and go, wow, I really want this to do this. That's on you. You probably do every bit of this without any of that at all. And then for me, the biggest is working on the reporting, making sure you're going to the table with one consistent report, one consistent message, one consistent view that leadership looks at and go, I get it, I see it, let's do something about it. So what this means for your recruitment team, there are fewer candidates per open role. We've talked about that. That number's not changing. I don't have the practitioner one on there, but you know it's 0.2. Outreach is harder. You know, it's going to take more effort than it did 2 years ago. That's almost 25% more. It is probably close to 38% if I look at the previous 2 years off that. So it's taking more, and it doesn't matter what tool. Some of the things coming out should help that stabilize, but I think with how physicians are looking, I don't see that declining at anytime soon. I think we'll see something dynamically shift probably in the next 3 years, but not anytime soon. Offers are not guaranteed, you know, so remember that offer goes out, don't stop, keep working the candidate. It's not a guarantee that once they've kind of said yes, that it's good to go, you're ready to go. And then vacancies stay open long enough to affect revenue and access. And this is where you're going to be able to go to the table, show that number, and then utilize that to move your team forward as you go through this process. Try to keep this at the 45-minute mark. I think I went maybe a little bit over, so I apologize. That's my contact information. I'm very responsive. Knowing some names on here, I already know which ones have my email address, probably have my cell phone number, but very open to questions, very open to topics. If there's something, we're actually working on a complete series I've teamed up with and getting feedback from some of our clients on budget. This isn't to benefit us, but this is the benefit. How do you work through budget? What does that look like? How do you present it? Some of this will go into that from that standpoint, but very open to suggestions on what areas you feel you're having problems with. What was that again? I didn't see the question, but definitely you can reach out. Let me go to the questions real quick.
Clint, it looks like we have a question. Do you have time to fill data per specialty?
Yes, we do. Allie, if you want to email me, I'll get in touch with you and we can start to look at that. We've shown it on a couple other slides, I believe, right? I know we did on the last one, Lynn. We had some time to fill.
Yes, yeah, we had some time to fill information.
Yep. So, but that once again was a snippet of one area and one group. So we definitely I can work with you to get that information. Thank you. So there was a comment out there on the AI salary analysis. If you didn't know and you are a client of Practice Match, there's a button by your posting. If you click it, it utilizes key data out there, MGMA, there's a couple other sources. It goes out and uses information to analyze the post, not only the salary, but what could be missing. It's part of what you already have. You click it, it emails you that report and gives you it doesn't change anything. So don't be fearful of clicking that button. It doesn't change a thing for you, but will tell you what you could change to make your posting stronger. So yeah, great. Thank you for giving us the feedback. But yeah, we're getting a lot of usage on that right now. And a lot more is coming with the AI side that I think you guys will be extremely excited about that we're working on in the background. Once again, that's my email. If you email me, my other contact information will be on my email. I have no problem connecting with all of you. I am not salesy. That's not my role. My role is to be strategic with clients and prospects and just this industry in general. I go to like conferences, speak, and try to do webinars, but I'll be more than willing to jump on any call that you guys might want. Okay. That would be great information. We'll take that back with us. Lynn, will I get transcripts of the questions? Will that be in there?
Oh, sorry, I muted myself. Yes, you will.
Okay, yeah, because I want to take that back to our head of development.
Absolutely.
All right. So if nothing else, thank you all once again. It is a privilege, and I truly mean that, to speak with each one of you. And either in this setting or individually, please reach out. If you need anything, want to just have a conversation. I will go back through this. We can slow down and go through it. I can talk to teams, doesn't matter. I do a lot of conversations with direct teams themselves, so please reach out.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Clint.
Not a problem.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.